Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello. Whether you're new to the show or an old friend, I'm so glad you can join us on Mission Evolution, where we bring the latest knowledge from today's leading experts. This hour will explore the trauma that binds you. We all suffer from trauma. For the most part, we just pick ourselves up, put it behind us, and go on. But is it really behind us, or does it still impact our lives? What are the hidden effects of unprocessed trauma as individuals and as cultures? With us this hour to delve into the topic of trauma is Dr. David Berceli. Dr. Berceli is an international author, presenter, and trainer in the areas of trauma intervention, stress reduction, and resilience and recovery training. He's worked and lived in war-torn countries and natural disaster zones around the world. He specializes in recovery with large populations. Dr. Berceli is also the creator of a revolutionary set of tension and trauma release exercises. He's the author of 3 books that have been translated into 15 languages, including The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process, Transcend Your Tough Times. His academic career includes a Ph.D. in social work, a master's in clinical social work, a master's in theology, and a master's in Middle Eastern studies. He's also a certified massage therapist and a bioenergetic therapist. His website, traumaprevention.com. Dr. Berceli, thanks so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Well, this is such an important topic right there. I'm so glad you could come on and join us. Now, it says you've lived and worked in war-torn countries and natural disaster zones around the world. What has that taught you about the lasting impact of trauma?
Well, it's interesting. It's a little bit paradoxical. When you're living in a war-torn country, everybody obviously in the country is traumatized. So everybody has behaviors that are trauma-based behaviors. You don't trust, people are frightened all the time, high levels of anxiety, sleeplessness, etc. Now, those are the negative aspects of living in that kind of environment. But the paradox, and I only know this from having lived there, is that you're living with people who are living every day of their life as though it could be the last day of their life. That's a fascination, because people who are living as though they may die tomorrow live very differently than people who think they're going to live over the next 50 years. So there's a quality and depth of life as much as there's a tremendous anxiety and fear of life. It's an interesting paradox.
Very, very. So you specialize in recovery with large populations. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so when you're in a place where there's been natural disasters or human-made disasters such as war, political violence, you don't have just a few traumatized people or a few family members who are traumatized. You have entire populations, whole cities. So we're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or potentially millions of people who have been traumatized. Well, the paradigm that we used to have around trauma recovery was you needed your 2 years of therapy with a clinical person to talk through the trauma, et cetera, to bring resolution to it. But that doesn't work when you have a million traumatized people. There's no such thing. That paradigm breaks down. So when I was living in these countries, I realized I need to find a method that can be applied to large populations and can actually be done without the aid or guidance of professionals. This re-empowers, which is very important for the trauma recovery process, re-empowers the individuals to actually act collectively to resolve their own traumas within their own families or communities.
Fantastic. Well, we will get into that process later on in the show, but let's go into a little bit more about trauma. Do you find that once a person has started to deal with trauma, that they have built more resilience than if they never had the trauma at all?
Well, that's interesting. There's been a lot of research about that. And the research still is not exactly conclusive. In general, what I find when I work with these traumatized populations is as they go through the resolution process, there is a stage of reintegration or reframing. So if you stay in the trauma, as an example, and you don't start to work through what that has done in your life, you end up repeating a trauma pattern or behavioral pattern in additional relationships and behaviors in life. But if you can go through what's called a transformation point or a reframing of that trauma, where you can take it inside and realize, I hated that trauma. I don't want to have gone through it. But since I have become a completely different person. And the way I approach relationships or life is completely changed. So there seems to be a moment or a time frame where you have to reframe the experience. And when you do that, then the trauma can bring you back to a deeper life than what you had before the traumatic event.
Does this reframing involve gratitude?
Unfortunately, yes. See, because that's painful. You don't want to tell somebody who's just been physically abused that you should be grateful for that. I mean, that's the wrong time. But at some point, there's a gratitude that I went through the experience, I survived the experience, and then the questioning of what did I learn about my own inner strength? That's what's invaluable. How did I become a stronger person as a result of this experience?
So we're looking at two different outcomes possibly here. One, the person that doesn't embrace the experience and make that reframing, and the one that does. Now, the one that doesn't is do they then become less resilient? Do they then recreate the trauma in their lives?
Yeah, that's almost perfectly right. What will happen is they create a behavior, which is part of a neural pathway. And so it's not just an ego or consciousness, it's being done unconsciously. But the behavior, sadly enough, ends up being because the human organism continues to grow through life, they'll re-experience in some way the memory of this traumatic event, and then they'll want to cut off from it, dissociate or numb themselves from it. So they go in and out of what we call this wave of the trauma gets resurfaced and I try to hide from it. That's when they start to use maybe substances as an example to numb themselves out, because the trauma emotional and psychological experience is so overwhelming and so intense. Our first desire is to just numb that out. And so then they'll get caught in this cycle of intense experience of life and numbing out. And then again, it resurfaces as an intense experience and they'll try to numb it out. And they get caught in that cycle.
Do they also tend to project the trauma of the past onto the circumstance of in the present, even though it's not necessarily the same?
That's almost exactly what trauma is. Trauma is having experience today that's activated by some experience in the past that is no longer present today. As an example, here's a good example. When I was living in war, I came back to the United States. My first few months back in the US, it happened to be 4th of July. Now, I was looking at the fireworks. I was saying in my brain, they are not dangerous. This is not war. And yet my heart was beating. I was actually having anxiety. I was sweating, even though consciously I was seeing that this was beautiful and should be fun and playful. I could not do that in myself. And that's a replication of a traumatic event, which comes from a neural pathway that was still activated in me just by sound.
So then, when a person is in that situation, PTSD, or again, just projecting the events of the trauma of the past onto the present circumstance, they can't really be present, can they?
That's the problem, is that our brain is somewhere else than where our body actually is. So I could be completely safe in my living room, even with friends, and still experience traumatic anxiety, like you said, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and they do not exist in the present moment.
So it's also a body issue, isn't it? I mean, the stimulus, then the body takes over with what it produces as far as adrenaline and brain chemistry, and on we go.
Right. Yeah. If you think of this is a little complicated because in science we've separated the brain and the body to study them, which has been very useful. We study neurology and we study physiology. But the human person is a living organism that's a combination constantly of both. They're interrelated to one another. So I could have a thought that causes me to sweat in fear, and there's no fear in the situation, but the thought is actually affecting my physiology. Or I could be in a situation of extreme danger, and if I'm dissociated, I'm not even having any result physiologically from that danger. So you can see how the brain and the body try to function together to help us survive, but sometimes those neural pathways get sort of confused. But there is no such thing as a separation between brain and body. That does not exist. And there's no such thing as a separation between neurology and physiology. They are constantly interacting in the human person.
Would you mind clarifying disassociation? What does that mean exactly?
Okay, so dissociation means that I might be here, but I'm actually cognitively not connected to where I am in my body. So dissociation is a great example. A simple car accident, as an example, a person could get out of the car, they could feel absolutely like they're okay, but then when they go home 4 hours later, they break down sobbing. That was a temporary form of dissociation from the overwhelm of the shock of the car accident. Even though I may not have been physically injured, it was still such an overwhelming sensation, but it couldn't be processed at the time because maybe crying or collapsing or falling apart was not the most useful thing for the survival of the car accident. And so the brain and the body collectively together will say, we're not going to deal with this right now. We're going to stay connected and we're going to stay integrated so that we can do what we need to do to survive. Once survival has been established and they're home and they're safe, then the neural pathways come back online and the person has a neurophysiological collapse from the experience.
Is there cases of disassociation that's long term?
Oh, yes, yes. If you have childhood developmental trauma is a great example, sexual abuse or domestic violence, you can live as a dissociated child all the way up to like 18 to 24 years old. And that's when sort of an adult neural pathway starts to develop. You start to kick in some new ways of behaving. And even only at that time do you begin to discover, oh my goodness, my whole childhood I lived dissociated. I never knew that. How could you know that if you have no feelings? Here's a good example. If you have a family member who might be alcoholic or a drug addict and they're unpredictable, as a child, you'll live with unpredictability constantly, which means you really never let your emotions be out and available because you never know if they're going to be smashed. And so you learn how to live without sensing any emotions, as an example, and then you learn that that's the way to live life.
That sounds like, and we're just about ready to go into a station break, but it sounds like you can't really process from that place, can you?
No, that's the problem. And then, but see, I believe that eventually what happens is that the organism chooses to come out of that state. It doesn't like it. It's too, like you said, there's too much adrenaline and cortisol running in the system. It's exhausting it, adrenal failure. And so it chooses to come out of that state, but then you start to feel, and that becomes terrifying.
Well, it is time for that break. Dr. Berceli and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing the devastating impact of trauma is Dr. David Berceli. His website, traumaprevention.com. Dr. Berceli, Would you say that at this point in our entire culture in the US is suffering from trauma?
I would actually say the globe is suffering from trauma. Now, and that's because of mostly news media. We're very much aware of everything that's going on the planet, or many of the things, and all the disturbances. Now, having said that, if I just can add a little bit, my question is, although this is traumatic experience for us, is this also the potential for tremendous growth, which we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier?
Yes, and that's the other side of that coin that again I would like to get into. How much does the recovery from the pandemic affecting our trauma level?
Well, the pandemic itself, which was fascinating to me, I watched, people were isolated and forced to be in isolation. And those people who didn't have enough integration within themselves found that terrifying and disturbing, and tremendous levels of anxiety and depression increased immensely. But people who were able to quietly go in themselves, they were able to see that as just an opportunity to be alone and to sort of integrate what's going on in the planet. But because our societies are so geared towards expression externally rather than reflection internally, a lot of people were very seriously traumatized by it. Obviously, if they lost their job and whatever, lost family safety. So we're still very much recovering from that. That's not over at all. And that's global.
And it's interesting when you spoke earlier in the first segment about how we don't like feeling that way. And so we get, the physical responses, and then we start to self medicate, whether it's through drugs or alcohol or overeating or sugar. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic. Does that continue?
Yeah, it will continue unless people replace something healthier in their lifestyle, because those things are addictive. So you're talking about food and alcohol, drugs, behaviors are even addictive. So once the pandemic was sort of over, what we call being over, people were able to go back out again. If they were able to re-engage in meaningful behaviors in their life, then they probably got through that or got rid of that addictive behavior because they actually didn't like it. It was the only behavior available to them at the time, or so they thought. But those who had nothing to replace that behavior are probably still stuck in that cycle.
Do you know if we're seeing an increase in addictions post pandemic?
We are. I know only in the United States, though. I don't know about globally, but fentanyl seems to be the highest increase in drug use that we have in the United States. I'm not sure it's from the pandemic exclusively, but I know that there's a huge, like 2,000% increase in the use
Oh,
and death, unfortunately, of fentanyl.
what is fentanyl? What does it do exactly?
Fentanyl, it's a synthetic drug, actually. And what's difficult about it is that you could take a little bit or a little bit more of it, a little bit more of it, because the dosage is not equal all the time. And so it's a drug, it's a synthetic drug, but when you take it by tablet form, or you can smoke it as an example, you don't know the intensity of the dosage that you're dealing with. So unfortunately, a lot of people are dying from it accidentally through overdose. And what they're doing is they're using it like in marijuana, as an example, where we have medical marijuana you're allowed to use. Fentanyl is a preservative. So people don't know it. They could be smoking marijuana that has fentanyl in it as a preservative. And so they're overdosing from that.
Oh my goodness. Is it also in our food?
Not that I know of. I'm not sure of that one, though.
There's that blessing, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how can a person tell if they're suffering from trauma?
Most of the time, people can tell because they feel lonely and isolated. They don't like their own behavior, or they don't even like their own thoughts. But there's like this glass wall, and they can't connect out to somebody else. So you could actually be experiencing severe trauma, as many soldiers do when they come back from having been in war. They could be sitting in the room with their family members and feel completely disengaged, even though they may be talking to them, but there's no connection, no heart connection, no emotional love connection, no connection of safety. It doesn't exist. So it induces a sense of real loneliness and isolation. That would probably be the key indicator that a person still is suffering from post-trauma symptoms.
Is that another case of the disassociation you were speaking of earlier?
Yes, exactly. Now, here's an example. That dissociation is they're dissociated from being able to have affection or connection to another person. But unfortunately, they're not dissociated from their own internal disturbance or dissatisfaction. They're feeling fear or anxiety or lack of love or connection, but they're not able to get out of that and engage in it externally. So there's a real paradoxical conflict that goes on in them. This is usually what leads to suicidal ideation.
Mm. We spoke of the body connection in this. What role does the body play in this state of disassociation and trauma?
Okay, so if you think of dissociation, think of numbness. So the body becomes numb. Like I said, you could hug and hold somebody, and you should be able to feel that. You should be able to let that inside of you and feel the warmth and the caring, but you're just physically hugging and holding. The sensory receptors in the very tissue itself are not fully activated. So I can hug somebody, but I can't sensorily feel them in that emotional connection way. I might be able to feel them physically, but I'm not online entirely to have that physical connection connected to heart, lungs, uh, our eyes, our lips. They're not all online. And so you don't have a full connection, which leads to senses emptiness and loneliness.
Which leads to substance abuse if you're not careful, yes?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm,
Yes.
mm. So we were talking about how, okay, on the one hand, there's the person that doesn't really recover. They just kind of start to project their experience onto their world at large. And is this kind of where they end up? Is in this disassociative state where they can't connect with other, and looking at depression and suicidal tendencies.
In general, yes, that continues. But as life would have it, there will be episodes that almost force us to reevaluate us. So you might see the birth of a child as an example. Maybe a young woman who had been abused as a child, or a young man abused as a little boy. But then they have the birth of a child, and somehow that miraculous event turns them on. And all of a sudden, their heart is alive. They have eye connection. They kiss the baby and they feel warmth. And this may be for the first time in life, or even if they just fall in love, partners or spouses fall in love. These adult experiences that we have later on in life constantly are kind of knocking at the door of the dissociated person saying, look, come alive, come alive. And so life in its own way has a way of trying to continue to re-stimulate us to stay alive.
But once that happens, then are we faced with the backlog that we have to work through to continue that aliveness?
Yes. As much as I hate to say that, that's when coming alive has two different experiences. It's paradoxical. I'm excited. I finally can feel and see and hear and sense things. And now I've got to deal with the 18 years of my life where I couldn't do that and why I couldn't do it and the person I hate for that reason and etc. So we have to go through all of that. That's that process we talked about a little bit earlier, where you have to take all of that experience and in light of the new person that you're becoming, you have to reframe that past experience as some way that it helps bring you to life.
Sounds kind of like when you've frozen your fingers and they're coming back to life. It's not a
It's
pleasant
no
experience.
different from that. We're just talking about an ego and neurology, but it's the same thing. It's about thawing out and getting feeling and sensations back again.
Is the first stage of that kind of being triggered a lot because suddenly you're aware of what you're feeling?
It has to be triggered, because if you're in a sort of numb or dissociated state, you're not aware of it. So there
Hmm.
has to be some trigger that pokes at it, okay? And then that's what causes the questioning inside myself to stimulate movement towards the trigger or away from the trigger. And that is usually what causes me to question, wait, am I alive, or do I feel? Am I afraid of this? Why am I afraid of it? Why am I in love, and why haven't I felt this for 18 years of my life?
Does it also, though, the point I was trying to make, does it also then you find you have a plethora of triggers
Oh,
that you
yes.
didn't feel before?
Yeah, because then you start putting that chain reaction together. Oh, I'm triggered for this, and then that triggers this, and that triggers this. And collectively, that's what causes me to live in a state of, I can't deal with this. It's overwhelming.
And so the tendency might be to go right back into disassociation.
Oh, very much so. Because, see, coming out of trauma is not a linear experience where you just go up and up and up and up. It really is a cyclical experience where you go up and down and up and down. And it's a process, depending on how severe the trauma was, how long it takes to go through that process to reframe the experience.
It does seem like a bit of a blessing, though. Couldn't it be hugely overwhelming if you just kept being plug away and keep advancing versus taking that breath backwards and going, okay, okay, I'm going to be numb for a little while. Now I'm going to
Yeah.
tackle it again.
I think we all do that every day when we get overwhelmed by the anxieties of the week. As an example, if you had a stressful week, you want to spend the weekend just vegging out and doing nothing, eating junk food, watching TV, turning your brain off. I think it's a natural response to an overwhelming stimulus in the body, which we call a stressor, but it could be over long-term a trauma. And we need to numb out at times. What we have to do is give ourselves permission to do it and know that we're actually doing it. Okay, I'm eating junk food this weekend because I'm fed up. Well, as long as you know that and you're doing that deliberately, that's okay. We know that junk food isn't good for us, but we know that come Monday, I'm going to stop that behavior. So, yes, we need these reprieves.
Absolutely a reprieve. We're about out of time in this segment, but let's take us back to the person that goes into isolation because of the pandemic. If they've been disassociative, how does that look differently than someone that has not?
Okay, the person who is dissociated from the pandemic and they're still in it, they're still engaged in the behaviors that they engaged in during the pandemic. They haven't replaced them with healthier, different behaviors, whatever they might be. And that might not, they don't have to go to the gym or anything like that, but they might have to reconnect with family members, or they need to go out and re-engage their social life, or even re-engage back with their children, as an example, if they had pulled away and dissociated from them, engaging in the school system. Whatever behaviors they had before the pandemic that were healthy, even if they were unhealthy, they could re-engage in those. But if they haven't done that and they're still living as though they're in the pandemic, then you know they haven't been able to come out of that and replace the behaviors.
When the question I was trying to ask is when a person is put in isolation and they're already disassociative, is it more difficult for them? Are they the ones that have trouble being alone with themselves?
Yeah, that's a little bit complicated because you're talking about two things. They're already dissociated and you isolate them more. It simply intensifies that dissociation.
Mm,
It almost becomes, in some ways, more desirable.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
See, and so that becomes the danger of it. They isolate even more because it seems to be even safer.
Mm.
And so now the pandemic's over, but they're still living in a very isolated way that they don't need to live in any longer. And so they don't re-engage.
Well, it is time for that promised station break. Dr. Berceli and I will be right back to continue this fascinating discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hi there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is author of The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process, Transcend Your Toughest Times, Dr. David Berceli. His website, traumaprevention.com. Dr. Berceli, Would you outline how trauma affects us on all four levels: the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual?
Okay, when you think of the human organism, I like to say that rather than the human person, because we're a biological living organism. Literally, there is no separation between any of those. We are biological, so we're physical, we're neurological. And so that means we have a psychology because of an ego or a cortex. And because we have a cortex or an ego, we can think outside of ourselves, a higher being or some sort of meaning in life. There's no way to separate those. And what I discovered is that every person who's recovering from trauma will hit every one of those four areas of being human. Even if they're atheistic and agnostic, it doesn't matter. They still question what happened, why did it happen, does it have any meaning? See? And so there's no way to separate any of those because we're neurophysiologically designed to sort of move forward or move through life with all of that integrated. It's when it becomes disturbed that we begin to have problems. But in life, we try to integrate all those. Even if we're abused as a child, we try to like give meaning to it. God is okay with it, or God's protecting me, or Allah, or whoever. Or I don't believe in any of that. But somehow all of that, a belief system, a neurology, a physiology, and an emotional state are all connected. And that's how we live as a human organism.
Do you find that when a person has suffered trauma and they're trying to walk out of it, sometimes one area or the other will become a real sticking point?
Yeah. Yeah, there are sticking points, and usually they come about, it seems, because that one issue that I can't get over, that was either the most painful or it's the safest place for me to still hold on. I can get rid of these other issues around the trauma, but not this one, because I'm still not feeling safe enough to let go of this one, or I refuse to let go of this one because this was where the real abuse occurred. So there is a sort of struggle that some of those traumatic experiences and events can be resolved, and some of them still need to be tightly held on to, which continues, unfortunately, to perpetuate post-traumatic stress symptoms, maybe at a lesser degree, but they're still there.
How much does guilt, at some point or another, when a person is abused, they take on guilt for the abuse? It's strange, but it seems to be the case. How much does guilt play in an inability to let go of the trauma?
Actually, it's a considerable amount, actually. There are studies and research being done around what's called guilt trauma. And so it's not about the abuse. It's about how I took that in, how I behave, how I feel shamed by that or shameful from that. And I feel guilty because of it. And that the trauma is perpetuated by my own guilt, not by the experiences that I had in life. So guilt trauma is becoming sort of the newest research topic, if you will, about trying to uncover all of the multitude of issues involved in trauma and trauma recovery.
It's a sticky widget, isn't it?
Oh, it very much is
Yeah.
actually, but it's kind of fun that we're looking at it now to say, wait, this person got through all of that, but they're still having guilt and shame. That's what's perpetuating the trauma. How do we bring resolution to that for the person as well?
So it I've heard of a trauma getting stuck in the body. Is that an actual thing?
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's go back to our neurophysiology as a living organism. I can have a thought of anger, just a thought. There's nothing in this room to upset me right now. But if I have a thought of anger, I could feel that my neck will start to contract, my jaw will start to get tight, and I've slowed down my breathing. My chest cavity will become constricted, all from a thought. There is nothing in this room to produce a physiological change, only a thought. And so that's the perfect example of A trauma, even if it's a psycho-emotional trauma, there's no physical abuse at all, it will still have a physiological reaction. And that's because we have a central nervous system, which comes from the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system that goes from the spinal cord out to the body. Those are connected directly. So you cannot have a thought without a physiological response to that.
Can it work in reverse? So, say, for instance, can a movement or palpating an area, can that then trigger an emotion or a memory that otherwise is dormant?
Absolutely. If I grab somebody in the arm that they might have had abuse from as a child, where they constantly got grabbed in the arm, I'm doing it innocently and playfully or something like that. They could have a reaction to that only because the physiology is sending the same signal back to the brain saying, that's dangerous, be careful. But see, that's how body-based therapies are built. I can also provide a loving touch to this and actually begin to heal that neural pathway that was connected to the fear in the tissue.
Ooh, that's fascinating. So, what is a body-based therapy?
Okay, body-based therapies are purely the belief that if I can figure out how to bring resolution to chronic tension patterns or disrupted pathways of neuroreception in the structure, okay, if I can bring relief to that, that could actually change the way you think about yourself and think about life. Okay, so we have chiropractors who fix the spine. We have massage therapists who soften the tissue. We have breathing techniques. All of these are body-based therapies that are designed to actually help bring resolution to the trauma pattern, but it works from what we call from bottom up. There's top down and bottom up therapies, and together they actually bring resolution to trauma.
So, if a person has suffered trauma, say they've been in a war torn country, they haven't had any physical trauma, nothing has hit them, nobody's grabbed them. Does the trauma still impact the body? And if so, how?
Oh, yeah. I work with soldiers all the time. So let's say they were never affected physically by the war, but psycho-emotionally, they were always facing a life or death threat. That means that their breathing is very tight. Their chest cavities are so tight and their diaphragm breathes so shallow because they're always constantly living in the intensity of the moment, the next moment. And so their breathing becomes very shallow. Their whole body is completely tight and restricted. So when they come home, they don't know it, but they actually can't just go, it's over, and let the breathing restore itself. The body relaxes, the neck lets go, the jaw releases, their abdominal cavity lets go so that there's better pulsation throughout the abdominal cavity. They can't do it. Interestingly enough, like we talked about earlier, they are so numb from having lived in this state, they don't even know they're in that state any longer. And so for soldiers in particular, body therapies are better because they don't want to talk about the experience. And you have great access into resolving those experiences just by using the body.
Dr. Berceli, knowing what you do about the body, given that you've studied massage therapy and all of these different modalities, can you personally just kind of sit back and look at a person and the way they move or the way they hold their body and recognize particular kinds of trauma?
Oh, very much so. Not just myself, but many body therapists. I mean, that's what we do. We first look at the alignment of the structure. We look at the breathing. We look at the hips. Are they higher or lower on one side, forward or backwards? All of that are cues. And only through experience do you get better and better at perceiving almost immediately, oh, wow, I can see already where they have a chronic tension pattern running through the structure. It may take a little while to get it out, but I know that if that pattern doesn't come out, they're not going to be able to go back into a fully alive organism.
So, Does that mean that you can work on it, you can figure it out mentally, you can work on the emotions around it, you can even kind of spiritually figure out why what happened or resolve it, but what happens if you don't treat those restrictions in the body?
It's very interesting. I have a lot of clients who come to me to say, I've done 5 years or 10 years of counseling. I know what my trauma is. I understand my behaviors, but I still can't get out of it. I'm still stuck. And that's when they come to the awareness that there's a physiological connection. There's no such thing as just resolving it neurologically or just physiologically. We're a neurophysiological organism. Both have to be connected. So I have to release the pattern, the holding pattern from the tissue associated with why you created that holding pattern. Both of those must occur. Now, sometimes they can occur just by me talking to you. So I could say to you, okay, just think about a beautiful, calm place in your life when you got free of the trauma. What's the day that you got free of it? And your whole body could just go, oh, I remember that so well. No, I didn't tell you to take a deep breath. I didn't tell you to let go or let down. I just said, think of the day that you were free. And just the thought created a physiological relaxation. I could do the same thing with you and say, take a nice deep breath and feel it in your belly and let it come out very slowly. And you do that. And then you say, that anxiety I had when I came in here, I don't have it anymore. So I didn't do anything with your brain. I just did something with the physiology. So you can see how they work back and forth with one another.
If the body isn't in the game yet, does it stunt the others from their healing as well?
For sure. At least that's what I've seen. You must include all four of those elements you talked about: the body, the emotions, the psyche, and the spirituality. They must all be included there. It's an impossibility to heal a trauma without all four of those being affected. Now, how that happens is very different for everybody, but all four of those are ultimately reworked and reorganized into a new way of being as a person.
We're about out of time in this segment, but you were talking about all this stuff that gets locked in the body. If we don't correct that as individuals, can it be passed on genetically? And could we have inherited some of it?
There's a lot of research around that, and that's not my particular field. And some of the research says, yes, we pass it on genetically. And some research says, no, we don't. So I'm undecided about that because I think the research is also undecided about it. But I wouldn't dismiss that as a possibility.
We sure see cultures carrying similar trauma, don't we?
Yes, but see, is that a learned behavior? And even if it's a learned behavior, is it genetically learned behavior as well? Different than just a psycho-emotionally learned behavior. So you're absolutely right about that. That's why it sort of needs a lot more study. Was that passed on genetically? And that's gene research, different from was it passed on psycho-emotionally or culturally, which is a psycho-emotional or behavioral research process.
Nature, nurture.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay. We are, like I said, about out of time in this segment. But when we come back, we've certainly outlined the problem beautifully. And I understand that you've done some very, very interesting work on creating tools to help walk us out of trauma. Um, so, what's the name of the technique that you've developed?
Okay, so the name of the technique is tension and trauma releasing exercises, just because it was sort of a simple name to apply to it. But it's just really a series of simple exercises that activate a natural mechanism in the human body to actually begin to resolve traumatic experiences.
Fantastic. Well, on the other side of this station break, we'll delve into that. So please stay with us as Dr. Berceli and I continue exploring overcoming trauma. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. And with us this hour, our expert guest is Dr. David Berceli. His website, traumaprevention.com. Dr. Berceli, we were talking about when we started the show, there was these two ways you could go with trauma. Is one that we've really outlined very thoroughly of not dealing with it and how what happens there. But then the other one whereby you do deal with it and you end up having a lot of resilience for the rest of your life. Um, so how does that how do you get that resilience? What it seems to generalize into more than just the resilience from the situation, but also in your life in general. How do you get there?
Well, resiliency is the recognition that the human organism survived this event, whatever the trauma was. And so resiliency is already built into us. And we needed these defense mechanisms of freeze and dissociation or rage and terror. All of those are defensive behaviors that we experience at the time of the traumatic event. That's wonderful. They are resiliency behaviors that helped us survive. Our problem is, can we let go of those behaviors? And when we do, we recognize we have a new resiliency of somehow that changed me. And it changed me to recognize the strength of my being, who I really am, and what I can survive. And so resiliency is simply taking all of those experiences that helped us survive, then letting them go and discovering underneath there the power that I developed as a person because I lived through a potential life or death threat. And now I am an amazing being because I achieved that.
That's our goal here, I think, for this show is
For
how do
sure.
you get there? And you spoke that the whole world is in trauma at this point. So the old paradigm of sitting down, talking it out, and all those wonderful therapies that we use aren't really a solution worldwide, large scale. And you developed a pretty fascinating technique. Would you tell us about it a little bit?
Okay. So a little sub uh, title to this is I'm trained as a clinical therapist. And when I lived in the US, that's what I did. But then when I moved in other countries like Sudan and Lebanon and other places that were experiencing war and violence, clinical therapy didn't work. And so it's almost like my paradigm was broken. That was my trauma. Was that all this training I had, I thought I was going to put to good use and discovered it didn't work. Thank God I had a background in body work. But I realized when I was watching people, think of this, two different experiences I had, very common to everybody in the world. One experience was that when a bomb or shelling would start or there'd be gunfire, immediately my reaction would be to crouch down into a fetal response. But when I looked around, everybody crouched down into a fetal response. That was normal. What fascinated me is we weren't trained to do this. Our neurophysiology knew that when this organism is in danger, pull it together, what we call the fetal position. You pull together, you protect your underbelly, and you crouch down. So that was the first thing. When I looked at that, I thought every human organism knows how to do that. No one was trained to do it. It just does it as an impulse. The other one, and this happened later on when I was in a bomb shelter and I had a couple of children sitting on my laps and the bombing was terrifying. And I was holding these children and I could feel in my hands that these children were tremoring in terror. And when I looked around the bomb shelter, I realized that all the young children were tremoring freely. But by the time they became like 10, 11, or 12, sort of those teenage years, I could see they were starting to shake, but they also were trying to control it or stop it. And none of the adults were tremoring. And that fascinated me because I thought, oh my God, I'm seeing how we would be if we weren't, quote, educated to control ourselves. That these 2-year-olds were actually being free and alive and tremoring out their terror. Whereas by the time we became teenagers, we were learning how to control ourselves from these, quote, primitive experiences. And all the adults were completely frozen. They didn't tremor at all. So when we got out of the bomb shelter, I asked the adults, do you tremor the way the children do? And the answer was perfect. They said no, because we don't want the children to think we're afraid. And right then, all the bells went off in my head. We think that tremoring, when we shake in fear, we're afraid, we're weak, we're vulnerable, we're insecure, we're not strong. So we've associated this tremor mechanism with very negative qualities, which is not true at all. Actually, the children tremoring were in a healthier, more alive organism than the adults who were frozen. So what I did was I took those two impulses, this one pulling together in a fetal response and the tremoring mechanism in the human body. And I thought, can we induce that tremor response in a safe environment? And is it able to release those tightly held tension patterns that we talked about in trauma? And sure enough, it does. All I had to do was find a position that inverted the fetal response. So that was an extended position. And if I hold a person in that extended position through a number of different ways, their body will begin to tremor. Once it tremors, we take them out of the extended position and they're just laying on the floor. And the tremor mechanism literally will travel through the structure, finding the contracted tension patterns, which it does not want because they're killing the organism, this alive organism. It's reduced its pulsation. And so the tremor mechanism's job is to actually find those patterns and release them so that pulsation is restored again and the human body comes back to life. And when it does that, it changes the neural connection that was associated with why they were holding that tight muscle group in the first place.
So to recap, see if I understand, as the people got older, the ones you were observing, they showed less of the outward signs of fear.
Right.
Was the trembling in the child actually processing the fear out of the body in the moment, or the others were internalizing it?
Yes, exactly right. The others held on to it, now unconsciously, but they basically froze the structure. They would not allow it to tremor, whereas the 2-year-olds didn't have that control yet. And so the organism was allowed to pulsate in whatever way it wanted for safety purposes. It's no different than when you see a dog shaking in a thunderstorm. You know the thunderstorm is okay. The dog doesn't know that. You know they're going to be safe. They don't know that, but they'll start tremoring. And the tremoring is the natural discharge of the high adrenaline that was immediately pumped into the body because of the fear. And so the tremoring serves for the purpose of discharging the adrenaline. And when it does that, it no longer contracts the tissue of the structure. Let's go.
So you recover quicker from
Oh,
the
yeah.
adrenaline rush than if you try to control it.
Yes, because that's one of the reasons we might drink alcohol. We'll have a glass of wine or a beer or something after a traumatic event. Let me calm down my nerves. So we take a drink. But the tremor mechanism does that automatically. What's really sad is when people come home from a car accident, as an example, and they're tremoring at the kitchen table saying, I'm still nervous. Let me take a drink to calm them down, which is the worst thing to do because the tremor mechanism is doing precisely that. So we've misinterpreted its potential therapeutic value.
Is there also a side effect of as you speak of these animals trembling or children trembling, my natural response is to comfort them, to protect them. Does it also have a side purpose like that?
Well, yeah, it's an overt expression of fear in the human organism. But instead of trying to stop the tremoring, you can hold them, which does comfort them, which produces the sense of safety, and therefore the adrenaline is allowed to go through the structure. The person's allowed to tremor. No different than if they cry. If a person is crying, you don't want to hold them to tell them to stop crying because that's just an organic pulsation of another overwhelm. But you do want to hold them to provide safety and say, you keep crying until it's done. It'll stop by itself when the adrenaline is over. The crying will stop and the person will feel great. But if we interrupt this biological mechanism, which is so organic, then we will freeze in the structure, the crying or the tremoring.
So let's take it back to how much trauma we have in the world, and we don't have a body worker to put a person in that position or anything else. What if your method can be used by the individual?
Well, that's the whole point, is the method was designed to be completely safe and effective without the direction of a therapist, see, because that's going to hinder everything. It should be used by families. It should be used by teenagers who are friends and a group, a social group. It could be used by organizations. First responders, as an example, I taught a lot of them. After they've come back from whatever tragedy they've been to, they can do that as a group. And so the exercises are free online, and examples of that are on my YouTube channel, which is simply David Berceli. But you could watch people tremoring from all over the world, and they're using it as groups and large populations, which is its value on the planet.
Have you done studies on the effectiveness and how much impact it's having?
Yes, we've done research, but it's sort of limited research because right now research is really hard and expensive to do. But as much as we've been able to do is on our website, traumaprevention.com, and you can see research that's been done all over the world. And so it's still scant in the sense that we don't have a double-blind study. It's expensive, and you need a population to do that with. But yes, we're very aware that research is invaluable. But what's really interesting to me, again, is that this technique, if you call it that, has been spread all over the world. And what's interesting, it's spread not because it has the research to substantiate it, but because people find that it works.
And
And
people are
so
seeing
there's a
results.
value
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, amazing. So is that time in our program when I have to ask you, Dr. Priscelli, what is your mission?
My mission is really to get people to recognize that they're in a living, pulsating organism, that if they're still alive, it has survived everything they've been through. That we have to recognize we are far more powerful and stronger as a living species than we give ourselves credit for. And for me, regarding this technique that I talked about, access that tremor mechanism because it's invaluable. We've been genetically encoded with it. It's in every human being. We've evolved with that in our structure. Explore and see how to use that as a way of bringing resolution to your traumas and actually helping you recognize how strong and powerful you are to have survived all of these traumatic events in life.
Have you also created a form that can be used by body workers and therapists?
Yeah, body workers and therapists are fascinating to me because they recognize that if somebody's on the table, chiropractor, cranial sacral therapist, massage therapist, they'll recognize that the body begins to tremor maybe when they have a release. But the only thing they know is, oh, yeah, that's a discharge of energy. Well, it's more than just a discharge of energy. So I'm trying to educate them in a different way to say, look, you don't need to learn a whole lot about trauma. You need to learn about the tremor mechanism and how to facilitate its release through the structure in your modality.
Hmm, fascinating. Well, we are just about out of time. What's your vision for the future?
I think that although we see ourselves going through very difficult times right now, I'm convinced from my own experience in working with a lot of traumatized people, the people who've been traumatized and have brought a substantial amount of resolution to their traumas, they are the people of the future. They're our visionaries because they're the ones that have a new vision of the way life should be. Like I told you, when I lived with traumatized people, they lived every day as though it was the last day of their life, and they lived more rich and more full than most people I experience in life. Traumatized
Well,
people are the ones of our future.
we are out of time. Dr. Briselli, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. David Briselli, an international author, presenter, and trainer in the areas of trauma intervention, stress reduction, and resiliency and recovery training. His website, traumaprevention.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to visit our archives, visit www.missionevolution.org. And do be sure to join us right here next time as this mission will continue.